Hello and welcome to s-factorsam. My name is Samuel Ray, and this is going to be a discussion video. I'm a little out of practice with this, but I don't write any scripts. I just kind of do things off the cuff. I like to give my thoughts unfiltered, just absolutely, straight up honest. So what I'm doing here is I am spectating a lobby hosted by Dunetti, so shout outs there. And what we're doing is I want to discuss something that just brought up a lot of thoughts, really. So back when, let's see, well, I guess a little bit of a background on me. A while ago, I used to frequently play fighting games. I spent about 20 years of my life playing a lot of fighting games. I was a big fan of them. My favorites tended to be the 3D fighting games because I grew up on titles like Soul Calibur, starting with Soul Calibur 2 on the GameCube, and then I played a lot of the Dead or Alive series, the Tekken series, Virtua Fighter. Those tend to be my favorites. And then of course Super Smash Bros. Even before I ever got into my first traditional fighting game. So what I wanted to talk about here was some stuff that came up recently, and I'm a bit late into the discussion cycle of things, but it's coming from the world of sim racing, that being Assetto Corsa EVO. They announced relatively recently that they would be restructuring the career mode in its entirety compared to what they originally promised in their early marketing, because the game is still in early access, so very prone to change, right? Subject to change, and you're essentially paying a decreased price to be a beta tester, essentially. So what happened was they were originally going to have a full-on progression system, sort of reminiscent of the Gran Turismo series or other single-player racing games with a built-in progression system with currency, like count currency. So as you play the different game modes, you get currency that you use to upgrade your car, buy new cars, and the like. And so what people were really looking forward to was that Gran Turismo type experience. Starting with one car, upgrading it until you can buy another car while you do races, both online and offline. Doing, getting kind of connected to your car, right, as you progress through the single player campaign and racing online. Well, here's the deal. They decided they were going to completely remove all currency and experience points based progression, essentially trivializing the concept of a career mode, kind of making it inconsequential. And a lot of people, rightfully, if you ask me, got upset. They felt like the rug was pulled out from under them, the bait and switch. And so what I meant to discuss was because I related that to my experiences with the fighting game genre. So there were people who were upset about the bait and switch change, right? But then there was also people on the other side of the aisle who advocate against any kind of progression-based system and just want all cars unlocked, of course minus DLC, because these things tend to release a lot of DLC packs for cars and tracks, and just race online, rarely race offline. Most racing sims, the AI are not able to give a human-like racing experience. The closest one would be this one, Automobilista 2, or AMS2 for short, and it has some of the most human AI, capable of making mistakes and just totally screwing up, which is a very human thing that it's interesting to program random mistakes into AI. Like, I find that pretty cool. And you can fill your lobbies with AI racers if you don't have enough human racers to fill a grid. Not many racing sims let you do that, but that's besides the point. This was a case where they had the promise and they portrayed the vision of essentially being a realistic racing sim with some actual gamified progression for some extrinsic motivation. Extrinsic meaning motivation outside of self-improvement and non-tangible things such as seeing yourself improve at a skill, right? Like eventually, obviously, the improvements are visible in the results, but something that is quantifiable, I should say, non-quantifiable, because you can't really quantify a skill outside of a ranking in like online ranked play. But those tend to be a lot more surface level and not 100% accurately indicative of your actual skill level, because a lot of it is dependent on the game's matchmaking, right? Actually having enough players and proper programming to allow you to race against people of equal skill or play against people of equal skill as you increase in your skills. So what I saw in this was a reflection of what I saw with the fighting game genre, where there was a dearth of content for a long time for offline play, for people who are not into the online competitive side of things, right? Because there is, in genres like this that cater more to a hardcore niche, as a developer, focus in a bit too much on that hardcore niche, you kind of lose sight of other things that are very valuable to make a good product, right? A sandbox isn't always the best way to go. Like, yeah, sandbox can be fun and all, but the way I see it is not every... I think limiting your product to just online ranked play is highly limiting. It is highly restrictive in the growth potential and the broadness of the audience appeal, but not in a way that really would, like, there's the concept of try to appeal to everyone and you appeal to no one. But at the same time, trying to appeal to almost no one and you're going to appeal to even less people. That wasn't as snappy as I imagined, but essentially, rather than trying to appeal to everyone, you want to appeal to more than just one, appeal to more than just one type of customer. You don't want to appeal to absolutely everyone, because then you're going to have just your generic slop, right? But if you pick a swath of types of people to appeal to, and there is a lot more than just, like you can have a focus more on hardcore competitive, but at the same time, you don't need to completely forsake the people who aren't necessarily very hardcore, right? Your casual players. This was also something I saw in the Monster Hunter community. Now, this went in the opposite direction. So I'm kind of drawing from a lot of observations and experience here, but essentially with the fighting game genre, it stayed so hyper focused on a small niche that they ended up painting themselves into a corner, right? They end up restricting themselves to a very small, hardcore, and frankly insular and sort of closed-minded or hive-minded, right? Very groupthink prone niche that discouraged developers from trying to innovate, trying to do new things, trying to make content that appealed to more than just the hardcore ranked mode grinders and offline tournament attendees. And then it got to a point where the genre became unsustainable unless they made drastic changes. And then when they do make those drastic changes, it heavily upsets the hardcore. But they had painted themselves into a corner to where that was unavoidable. If they had been allowed by their audience to actually make small incremental changes to try and innovate things and figure out a balance on how to make their title still appeal to their core audience, but also draw in new players, then you get, a better product overall that's able to do more than just one thing, while not trying to do too many things, right? And that's kind of what I was getting at. When you make changes, you're always going to have those people that push back against it, right? Humanity is a weirdly contradictory species. We hate change, but at the same time we need change because stagnation is bad for us mentally. But at the same time we're scared of change and push back against change. So like it becomes a real confusing scenario, right? Because, and that's why I said you need to make small incremental changes. But for that to happen, the community, at least in the context of games, the community needs to allow developers to make those changes, right? And a positive example of this is the Monster Hunter series, because that series for a while had been niche and frankly unapproachable to many. I found it quite unapproachable and was unable to really get into it, find anything to latch onto when I was younger, playing the PSP one, Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, or playing the 3DS. 3DS entry, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. I was unable to get into it because it just felt super obtuse to play on a mechanical level. But when Monster Hunter World came around, they made some changes to some of the core mechanics and ended up streamlining a lot of it. And in doing so, yes, they upset a lot of the longtime fans, but the core of Monster Hunter stayed intact. What made Monster Hunter remained. And what was sacrificed was the stuff that kept people out for very little gain, right? Very little benefit. Streamlining and or removing stuff like that actually was a huge improvement because Monster Hunter World became Capcom's single most selling game of all time. It did insanely well and skyrocketed the series in popularity. And after doing so, then they were able to release another highly successful sequel, Monster Hunter Rise, a game which I am very familiar with, and I played hundreds and hundreds of hours on the Switch when it was exclusive on Switch. And I was even I wouldn't say a top streamer, but I was one of the most active Twitch streamers for Monster Hunter Rise. I was in the top 9% in terms of hours streamed. And it was my staple game. It was my go-to. And people came and joined in the lobbies frequently. I had playing with viewers lobbies going and had a full squads of 4, whether that be friends and other content creators to collab with, or whether that be viewers joining in. It was a fun time, and that further had streamlined the experience and made it even more approachable, especially because it was on a hybrid handheld console, so it needed to be streamlined in order to be bite-sized for handheld play. And it, in my opinion, was the best Monster Hunter game that's ever been released. And while there still was a contingent of veteran players who hated all the changes in Monster Hunter World and Rise and refused to play anything that came out after Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, at least they still had an entry on a modern console, that being the Switch, that enabled online play. So they still had something to latch onto, and that game has insane amount of content because it's like a best of old school Monster Hunter kind of game. But again, that's besides the point. I digress. The changes they made to Monster Hunter didn't betray what Monster Hunter was at its core, and they kept its identity intact while making it more approachable and more enjoyable to more people. But it didn't completely sell out and become Fortnite, right? And so it was an example of change done right, and they did not sacrifice what made it great and what appealed to a lot of people. A lot of people wanted a very large variety of content, and that is what they got. Now imagine you take Monster Hunter and you remove the ability to do offline hunt. You remove single player content entirely. There's no progress to be made when playing single player. No upgrading your gear, no buying new gear, right? You're just hunting monsters for the sake of hunting monsters with nothing to show for it other than maybe your hunt times, how quickly you were able to finish the hunt, and the leaderboard. That is just an inferior product. Objectively, it is that progression, that tangible, visible progression of power to go along with your progression of skill, as well as the progression of the visuals of your hunter, your armor and your weapons progressing through the trees of the stuff you're building and upgrading. That gives you motivation to keep going, right? Without that, it would feel empty, pointless. That was the issue that the fighting game genre fell into, where the only thing you had was internal motivations of wanting to get better and a rank bar, rank points going up and down. That appeals to a very small amount of people with a very specific personality type, namely those who have a competitive streak, a very strong competitive drive, and want to overcome other people at all costs, or the type of people who are very, again, intrinsically or internally self-motivated and gain satisfaction from simply improving skills. But the problem is, in this day and age, there's not a whole lot of people like that. And there's many different reasons why you can not be that kind of person. It could be because you just lack free time, right? That's kind of the case for me. I don't lack a lot. I don't have a lot of free time anymore. Not like I used to. Back when I was playing fighting games, yeah, I had the time to practice, to grind, or to try and get good. I don't have that time anymore. So now I focus more on things that can be a little more immediately fun, or at least learned intuitively through doing while you're having fun. The process of learning is fun. You don't have to learn to access the fun. And that's why the fighting game genre struggles a bit, and they've been struggling to try and make changes to that, which has then been extremely off-putting to long-term fans, right? Veteran players. And then Monster Hunter, what it did was it streamlined things to make things much more fun more immediately. They shortened the grind on a lot of things. They removed a lot of tedious elements. They designed things to be a bit more intuitive and less obtuse. That way, when you jump into it, you don't feel entirely lost and unable to get your feet under you. And offered a heck of a lot of content for single player or offline play to get a good feel for the game, or just enjoy playing the game on your own terms. Freedom of choice, right? When you limit yourself so much to just online ranked and offline sandbox, and that's it, you don't offer your players enough choice how they want to enjoy the game. You're telling them, we're making this game only for this type of person, and if you're not this specific, very narrow audience, then you're not going to have anything to enjoy here. And I feel like that's just not a good way to go about things. Like, yes, you do want to have a target audience. That much is obvious, but you shouldn't be overly narrow in it. It comes down to balance. You do want your product to be, some extent, expandable, growth potential. Because if you only cater to a very narrow subset of people, then they eventually age out of the hobby or the game or the product, or lose time to partake of it. What's going to happen? You're not going to have any new people to fill those gaps. And then you're going to have an unsustainable product / service / game / activity / sport. And just overall, very nearsighted and not very sustainable long term. And so that's something definitely that more developers should be mindful of. And in this case, the Assetto Corsa EVO developers, I think they may have put the cart before the horse in all the stuff that they promised. They definitely should have dialed back expectations early on from the get-go. Like, they definitely were aiming a bit too high, and they set up their audience for disappointment. Because in this genre, we already have a whole lot of games that are just sandboxes designed for online play. Right? Sandboxes offline, ranked online, and that's all they offer. Or not even ranked online, just lobbies, and up to the players to make their own ranked leagues and stuff, which is to some extent even lazier. And the only focus is the graphics and the physics. Just a framework, not even a game, not even a full product, just a framework, some cars and some tracks, right? Physics, cars, tracks, and then graphics. There's a lot of that already. There's a whole lot of that. That's kind of the whole sim racing genre, really. If you want actual like in-game progression systems and reasons to play beyond racing other people or racing poorly designed AI that race nothing like a real human, are incredibly robotic and stuck on lines in a train, you don't get anything else, right? There are no options. You don't get to enjoy anything. You have nothing to appeal to you. That you just don't matter to the developers. And that is kind of what the Assetto Corsa EVO developers, Kunos, have demonstrated. They promised something that was a bit more gamified, something for people who don't want to just do online ranked racing or pointless offline sandbox racing. Gave them something to look forward to. I was one of those people. There's only one reason I still have the Assetto Corsa EVO and will keep it, is because it offers a variety of street cars and cars with an H pattern shifter, traditional stick shift rather than paddle shifting. And that's a rarity in the sim racing genre, especially in sims that have online featured racing / ranked racing. Almost no sims features with H pattern shifters in their online ranked. This is one of the very few that does. Heck, even Gran Turismo 7, which has more road cars than any other racing sim or sim light, save for maybe Forza Horizon, or not Horizon, Forza Motorsport. But even Gran Turismo 7 forcibly deactivates H pattern shifter hardware when you go into the online mode, or at least when you go into the online ranked mode. Now, when you're self-hosting a lobby, you can have H pattern shifters work, so they work in the unranked lobbies. But then you're returning to just sandbox mode, so to speak. Forza Motorsport allows you to race almost anything with an H pattern shifter in online ranked matches. If the car is allowed in that series that you're racing, then you get to have an H pattern shifter and have it actually work. But regardless, that's the only reason I'm keeping EVO, because it's a realistic sim with actual H pattern shifter cars in the online ranked racing. So that's good for me for the most part. Now, when it comes to the removal of the progression in the career mode, it is disappointing. It genuinely is. And if you ask me, it is objectively a poor decision, especially since they already put it in the players' heads that that's what they were going for. It could have set itself apart as different from all the hot lap and online ranked simulators. It could have done what Project Motor Racing failed to do due to its poor launch, although I have heard that PMR is making big improvements to its system and its stability and the quality of its physics engine and all that kind of stuff. So there's potential. There's hope that it could really clean itself up, and if they can make the racing AI half as good as this game, AMS2's racing AI, then PMR could become a really great value product with the almost not roguelite, but permadeath style career mode option, where you have to, I would call it like the Armored Core of racing, where you have to pay for all of your damages on your cars for the repairs. You have to pay for your travel, you have to pay for your resources, your research and development and all that stuff. And so it adds a level of pressure that's pretty realistic, in that you don't want to just send it in and trash the car, because you only got one car until your racing team gets enough funds to have multiple cars. You've only got one. And so I really like the potential of that. The concept is great. They just need to fine tune and polish up the product, but it has potential to be better than any other sim that's out there, just like Assetto Corsa EVO was looking to be before they made the changes. Again, mirroring the fighting game where the majority of the offerings for a solid, I would say, 10 years was just online ranked and offline tournament play. That was all they were good for. Their single player offerings became garbage after a while. And the ones I grew up on back in the 2000s through, I would say, about 2012, 2015-ish, often had really good offline single player content. I mean, if you look at Super Smash Brothers, the reason it's so good is because it is so varied. There's so much you can do in it. You can play online in the later ones. You can play online ranked if you want. You can play online casual. You can play offline with items. You can customize your rule sets as you like. Your stage selections. It has all sorts of wacky modes that implement different item effects from the get-go, giant match and whatnot. But then they also have a lot of good single player content, from the earlier game's classic mode to adventure mode in Melee, to Subspace Emissary in Brawl, to the story mode in Smash Ultimate. Like, it was all, they always have really good variety and selection of single player content. And because the game's gameplay design is so intuitive, you get better just by playing. You have fun in all these crazy modes, and doing so teaches you all the skills you need to get good at the game, naturally, intuitively through doing. Because you're unlocking stuff, you're unlocking trophies, you're unlocking songs, playing the gallery, you're unlocking characters, you're unlocking stages, you're progressing through a campaign mode of sorts, whether that be classic mode, adventure mode, story mode, whatever. You're progressing through single player campaigns, you're unlocking stuff, you're experiencing stuff, you're progressing a story, albeit a light story, or you're progressing through levels to a conclusion, right? And then you do it again with different characters, or with higher difficulty setting, or with different modifiers, and you never run out of stuff to do, and the whole time you're doing it, you are learning and improving intuitively. Gran Turismo 7, or Gran Turismo 4, I should say, is lauded as the best sim racing career mode. And it doesn't have too much of a story to speak of, from what I've seen, but it's structured so well that it is beloved by many. That structure giving progression, giving purpose to what you're doing, giving intrinsic motivation through unlockables, tangible progression. That's all very important to the longevity of your product, growing your audience, to helping your audience develop the skills they need to enjoy your game in the long term, in more ways than just playing competitively, learning from YouTube videos or whatever, grinding hot laps to get better with a car or track combo. You gotta offer more. You have to offer more in order to set yourself apart as a quality product. And not only has Assetto Corsa failed at that, when they had the potential to be an industry leader in that, or genre leader, I should say, but you have all these people praising the decision, saying that career modes don't belong in racing sims. They need to go to arcade games, which sim racers often use as a derogatory, as a bad thing, even though they tend to be a lot more on the enjoyable side when it comes to being products for enjoyment, which, if you think about it, for the vast majority of us, sim racing, or racing in general, right, motor racing, will never be a profession. We'll never do it professionally. Less than 1% of all people are able to actually motor race, and one of the main requirements is they have to be rich, right? So for those of us who are regular people who aren't the rich and affluent and skilled in that way in real cars, sim racing is a hobby. It's an activity to be done for enjoyment, just the same as how any athletic sport, swimming, basketball, football, baseball, hockey, any of that, for the overwhelming majority who are not playing those games. And yes, they are called games. Sports games, they're the same thing. Sports are forms of games. But for any who are not doing it professionally as their job, it is a game. And it's simple as that. Sim racing, even though they try to differentiate themselves from racing games, racing sims are still games. They are products for our enjoyment, right? For the enjoyment of the consumers who purchase them and partake of them. They are for our fun. They are not our job. They are not our main profession, our way of making a living. We do it because we enjoy driving. And this allows us to drive types of cars and on track, to drive cars and tracks and in environments that we never would be able to in real life. But being a quote serious end quote sim isn't necessarily a thing that disqualifies it from being a game. It is a game. It doesn't matter what you think or what you feel, racing sims are games. Unless you're Max Verstappen winning tournaments in it, entire league competitions and making money while doing so, although I don't think he does make money much while doing so. He makes most of his money through driving Formula One. But generally speaking, these are not something that you can't categorize as a game. They are games. So you need to make them good products as games. Yes, keep the realistic physics. Keep the realism. It's fine. But that doesn't mean you have to throw away the entire concept of making a fun game with some form of in-game progression. You don't have to ignore the potential that brings simply because it's labeled as sim. Another genre I've seen fail to do this right is the shoot 'em up genre, or shmups, as they're colloquially called. Shoot 'em ups originated in the arcades, usually vertical or horizontal scrolling, automatically scrolling games in which you control some sort of a jet fighter or spaceship, or space fighter or whatever, and you're shooting at enemies that are coming in your direction or moving in different directions and patterns on screen, right? Well, those games never evolved past the arcade. Once the arcades no longer became commonplace in countries outside of Asia, the genre never tried to, I wouldn't say never, the genre as a whole didn't make those changes to make good products outside of leaderboard chasing, right? Chasing high scores. That's all they offer. And while that can be fun for a little while, it either can lead to burnout, get real sick of it, or you just lose interest after a while, which is what happened with me. And it ends up being kind of vapid, kind of empty. There are a few that buck the trend and try to do something different. One of them is my personal favorite, Zero Ranger. It is so good. And it actually implements a form of progression into it. The way you unlock extra lives, the more you play. That way, those who are super skilled and want to get good at doing, one credit finishes, right, one credit completion, so to speak, can do so. But those who maybe struggle a bit, the more they play and the more they try to improve while playing, the easier it'll become because the more lives you'll unlock. It's a nice way of having a scaling difficulty without completely eliminating the challenge, without completely destroying the core of the genre. If there were more shmups like Zero Ranger, we would see a much more lively and thriving genre rather than one that only thrives within its self-contained insular niche. You can do it. You can keep the core of what a shmup is alive while still making it appeal to more types of people than just the leaderboard chasers. Again, you don't need to appeal to everyone, but you need to appeal to more than just one type of person. That is where the issue lies all the time. The shmup genre with the fighting game genre. The fighting game genre went on the opposite end of things. They appealed to only one type of person, so to speak, for too long, to the extent where they had no choice but to make big changes to try and draw in a broader audience. And then they overcorrected and made changes, too many changes, too big changes, too frequently, all at once, in an effort to pull in seemingly the entire audience that never cared for it before, which, while a much more vast audience than the fighting game hardcore, it's still not the best way to do that, because if you do things that way, then you're too big of a change destroys the retention of the core audience you already had. No balance. Monster Hunter did it right. It made small changes that kept the core soul of Monster Hunter intact, but streamlined things or removed things that were not necessary for that core to stay intact, that made the game series too obtuse, too unintuitive, or counterintuitive in some ways, or just plain unfun to play. Racing sims I see being in that same position. So many of them just appeal to one type of person, so to speak. Not even trying to do things better, not trying to innovate and evolve, keeping the core intact. And then oftentimes the ones that do, they either end up having a lack of support from the audience or from the publishers or whoever it is that bankrolls it, or they get outright backlash from poor audience members, which discourages them from attempting anything new, resulting in stagnation. So the sim racing genre could go in one of two ways. It could either go the way of the fighting game genre and make, well, maybe it's not two ways, maybe it's three ways. So they can stay the course and just keep doing things the way they've been, which is like the shmup genre, resulting in stagnation, nothing new, no reason to play if you're not the online ranked grinder or the sandbox, intrinsic sandbox enjoyer. Or they can overcorrect and then make changes that practically turn them into something closer to Need for Speed, right? Which is very much not realistic, rather focused on like thrills and fun, right? I think what Assetto Corsa EVO was originally going to be is the perfect balance. Realistic, but with a built-in progression system. That was the ideal balance. They threw it away to go back, to regress to catering just to the one type of person, so to speak. It was a mistake. It was a poor decision, and I'm not sure how they're going to make a career mode that is worth playing without some form of in-game progression. I have no idea how they're going to do that. They say they're going to make a quality career mode. I am extremely skeptical, and I'm not entirely sure how they can even pull that off. It just baffles the mind. But people seriously need to stop advocating for a lack of single-player content, a lack of a career mode, and praising decisions like what Kunos did. We need full products. We need things that are going to be fun for more than just the hardcore competitive type. And we need those changes to be made incrementally. And, you can still allow the online hardcore play and the sandbox play. That's fine. It's not going to take much to do that and then do a career mode of some kind with actual progression. It's not that resource eating, right? Resource intensive. There are independent modders who have created well fleshed out career modes without being paid for it at all. There are people who have made companion apps designed to mimic a career mode visually and functionally without actually being in game, right? Without changing the game or the parameters of the sim. It's not out of the question for a developer to implement some form of career mode, at least something serviceable. And people need to stop acting like having that kind of content in there is somehow a bad thing. Yes, familiarity can be comforting, and that is important, especially in a day and age where anxiety and uncertainty are more commonplace than ever. But we also I botched that sentence. But we also shouldn't be so resistant to change that we encourage stagnation instead. Stagnation is unhealthy as well. We need to encourage developers to innovate and evolve while keeping the core intact. That's what we should be pushing them to do. And when they make decisions that are a regression for the sake of tradition or for the sake of, I don't know, laziness, I guess, trying to decrease the scope of your project, that needs to stop. It just does. Otherwise, you're going to go the way of the FGC or the way of the shmup, and neither are great. If you want this to thrive, let the devs try something new. You have 100 sims that are just sandbox, hot lapping, and online racing. Play those if that's all you want. You can get them cheap on Steam sales pretty frequently. But if a sim dev comes out wanting to make something with an in-game progression system, some reason to play aside from grinding a rank, let them. Heck, if you're not against it, encourage it, because products like that will grow the genre. They'll grow the genre far better than any of the hardcore-centric design will. And that's just always the case. Don't try to frame sim racing as some sort of highfalutin, highbrow, rich people's real racing kind of vibe. Okay, we're wannabe racers. We're pretend racers. So why not let the pretend racing be fun? Keep the realistic physics, but give us something to have fun with. So that's really the crux of what I wanted to say. And I hope that this goes in the direction of Monster Hunter rather than that of the fighting game mob genres. I'm a driver. I enjoy driving. I fell out of love with the racing genre in my teenage years. I was away from racing games in their entirety since Forza Horizon 1. Played that a bunch, and I guess I did play some Need for Speed Heat, but I never actually completed the campaign on that because I hated the way that the police are in the nighttime chases. It was just irritating. So I ended up bouncing off of that for a bit. But something like Gran Turismo, but with more realistic physics, that's amazing. We need that because there is nothing like Gran Turismo on PC. Closest we can get is Forza Motorsport, which is a sim light. Let the devs do that. And if the devs promise that and then change their mind and change the product entirely that people already bought into with actual money, yeah, people are going to be upset and people are going to deserve to be upset. That is borderline unethical business practice. Entirely unethical, but it's on the level, like on the edge of that. So yeah, I'm still going to keep an eye on Evo because AC Evo is like the only realistic sim that has road cars and other cars with stick shift, like frequently and prominently in the online rank racing. So unfortunately that means it's going to be one of the few that I will play online ranked in because I want to pretty much exclusively use a stick shift. Fortunately, Race Room doesn't always feature ranked races with stick shift H pattern shifter cars. Assetto Corsa EVO always has at least 2 series of ranked racing that have stick shift. GR86, and then whatever their vintage or Miata or what else? I guess to some extent touring cars. They always have at least 2 series with stick shift, if not 3. So that automatically gives it a bit more value in terms of the online ranked racing for me. But I really was wishing and hoping that it would turn out to be even more than that, and that would become something kind of like Gran Turismo. And I am disappointed in Kunos for the decision they made, and even more so than that, for the comments afterwards in the interview with Traction, being asked about that, then the guy, the head or the representative or whatever he was, making his comment, his response to that, trying to make excuses about how they couldn't handle the scope of it, or that they decided they had to remove it in order to be able to create the rest of the game, its foundation, its physics, and its online racing, any level of quality. And then closing out the thought saying, it is what it is. No, people are upset because you pulled the rug out from under them, and justifiably upset. It is what it is does not really apply there. What it is they bit off more than they could chew. They promised more than they could deliver, and they bailed on the thing that every other sim bails on, which is the single player experience. Not every other sim, but most sims, or at the very least that most sims postpone and put back as the very, very, very last thing they will consider. Like in the case of Automobilista, great foundation, great online racing system that's accessible and approachable, with peer-to-peer connections and filling grid spots with AI racers. And they have a career button on the main screen that is always grayed out. And they've gone on record saying that career mode is the very last thing that they're ever going to put into the game. Like, it's just stuff like that. Devs need to remember these are games. Make some good games and you will get more players and you will grow. And as long as you make the act of improving fun by having in-game progression systems and unlocks, for example, you will have more players and you'll have more players improving their racecraft through doing. And that in turn will benefit the genre as a whole and the community of those who play the genre. All right, that's it for me. That's my thoughts on the topic. Again, not scripted. I try not to do scripted videos when it comes to my discussion stuff. I like being raw and unfiltered and unplanned because I feel like it comes out a lot more genuine that way. And so that's kind of my aim for that. If you enjoyed this, make sure you check out what's on screen next, because it'll be more of the kind of content that YouTube already thinks you enjoy. Thank you for your support, if you made it all the way to the end, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been S-Factor Sam. I am Samuel Ray. I'm out of here. Signing off. See ya.